So it is a really chilly morning in February of 2026.
Right.
And there's this 79-year-old man in suburban Colorado. He just rolls his trash can down to the public curb.
Just a totally normal chore.
Exactly. But he is completely unaware that inside that trash can, there is a discarded, kind of sticky plastic bottle of barbecue sauce.
Yeah.
And that specific bottle is about to trigger the total collapse of a lie that he has been telling for, 45 years.
It is wild. It really shatters all our preconceived notions of, dramatic courtroom confessions or rusted murder weapons being dredged up from muddy riverbeds.
Oh, absolutely.
Instead, this case is just a masterclass in patience. We are looking at the exact, precise moment where modern forensic molecular biology suddenly and, well, violently collides with a decades-old trail of financial desperation.
Yeah.
It's closing a loop that has basically been bleeding open since 1981.
And that is the absolute mission of this deep dive today. We have pulled an enormous stack of sources for you. Original 1981 police reports, dense historical financial documents.
A lot of paperwork on this one.
So much paperwork. And we've got uncensored forensic reconstruction files, plus the brand new court indictments leading right up to literally today, July 20th, 2026.
Right.
We are going to meticulously trace this entire timeline for you to understand how a really tangled web of real estate deals and white-collar fraud escalated into a brutal homicide.
Yes.
But before we get into the details, I do need to set a ground rule for you listening.
This is important.
Yeah, we are not going to censor any of the forensic evidence today.
No.
To truly grasp how this case was finally cracked, you have to understand the exact unfiltered reality of this crime scene. It is intense, it is incredibly violent, but it is entirely necessary.
It is.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to really comprehend that violence, you first have to understand the environment that incubated it, right?
Yeah.
And in this specific scenario, that environment wasn't like a dark alley or a bad neighborhood. It was built entirely out of legally binding paperwork and past lives.
Right.
Long before we examine the murder of 35-year-old Beverly Bruneau, who went by Casey, by the way, we have to look at her career, her friendships, and a very specific, very dangerous mortgage agreement.
So let's wind the clock back a bit to the late 1970s. This is well before the escalation in the winter of 1980. Casey Bruneau and her close friend Thelma Brown are both working as flight attendants for Braniff Airlines.
Which was a huge deal back then.
Oh, totally. This is the golden era of Braniff. It's a glamorous, high-flying job. They are independent professional women, and they decide, hey, we want to plant some permanent roots.
Right.
So they decide to move in together as roommates and jointly buy a residential house in Dallas, Texas. And they sign a formalized co-ownership mortgage agreement.
And, on the surface, that looks like a highly responsible financial decision, right?
Yeah.
Two professionals pooling their resources to build some equity.
Yeah, makes total sense.
However, the legal covenant they signed had incredibly strict stipulations. It explicitly stated that both women remain jointly and strictly liable for the monthly mortgage payments, like unconditionally.
Wow.
Yeah, it absolutely did not matter if one of them got married or relocated or lost their job. The bank expected its money in full from both of them.
Right, and here is the detail buried in the real estate files that just, it stopped me in my tracks.
It's crazy.
To even secure this mortgage, the bank required them to agree to a reciprocal life insurance clause.
Yes.
Basically, if either of the co-owners died, this mandated insurance policy would trigger and pay off a massive chunk of the remaining mortgage balance.
Right.
It's less like a safety net and more like, tying two mountain climbers together on a steep cliff face. The bank doesn't care if one of you wants to climb a different mountain. If one loses their grip, the other is forced to carry 100% of the weight, or they both just fall into total foreclosure.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that financial cliff face becomes incredibly perilous because of entirely ordinary life changes.
Right.
Thelma meets and marries a man named Larry Dean Brown.
Okay.
And Larry is also steeped in the airline industry. He is a former pilot and an engineer for Braniff Airlines. They get married, and naturally, Thelma wants to move out of the shared Dallas house with Casey to start a fresh life with her new husband.
Sure, yeah.
So Larry and Thelma go out and buy a second residential property, this one out in Grapevine, Texas.
But because of that strict liability clause we just talked about, Thelma moving out does not magically remove her name from the Dallas loan.
Not at all.
So now you have the newlywed Browns paying the mortgage on their brand new Grapevine house,
Hmm.
while Thelma is simultaneously still on the hook for her full half of the Dallas house with Casey.
It's a huge burden.
And then the bottom drops out. The late 70s and early 80s were just brutal for the airline industry, thanks to the Airline Deregulation Act and skyrocketing fuel prices.
Hmm.
And Larry gets laid off from Braniff Airlines.
This layoff is the absolute catalyst for the entire psychological pressure cooker. Job loss is always difficult, obviously.
Yeah.
But for someone in a high-status, really identity-defining position like an airline pilot and engineer, it is a massive blow to the ego.
Oh, I can imagine.
Suddenly, their financial resources are severely strained, they're bleeding money across 2 different properties, and their primary income has just vanished into thin air.
Wow.
So Larry and Thelma pivot, and they point all of that mounting pressure squarely at Casey Bruneau.
Right. They demand that Casey either find a new roommate immediately to cover Thelma's portion of the mortgage, or that Casey somehow sign a legal release freeing Thelma from all her financial liabilities.
Which is a huge ask.
And Casey, who, by the way, hasn't done a single thing wrong here, she just wants to keep living in the house she bought, she adamantly refuses.
Good for her.
Yeah, she is entirely steadfast in protecting her own financial stability.
And you can actively watch the economic desperation morph into deep interpersonal resentment here.
Yeah.
Larry and Thelma are trapped by their own financial overextension, but they begin to view Casey's entirely justified refusal as an active, hostile threat to their very survival.
Wow.
It is fascinating how quickly economic panic can shift perfectly ordinary people toward unthinkable extremes. They cease viewing Casey as a friend or a former roommate, and they just begin treating her strictly as an obstacle to their financial salvation.
And that desperation doesn't just simmer. It brings us directly to actual documented criminal behavior.
Yes, it does.
It's November 1980. Casey Bruneau travels out of town. And while she's away from the Dallas property, a fire suddenly breaks out at the house.
Just out of nowhere.
Right. Dallas Fire Rescue responds, and they successfully extinguish the blaze. But then, bizarrely, later that exact same night, a completely separate second fire erupts in the home.
Which is highly suspicious.
Totally. Fire investigators review the scene and officially classify the incident as suspected arson.
Because a dual ignition fire on the same night the co-owner happens to be away is, frankly, statistically absurd. It screams intentionality. And Larry Brown decides to leverage this arson into a highly organized, fraudulent insurance scheme.
Oh, wow.
Larry has a partial ownership stake in a local construction company, and his plan is audacious in its criminality. He approaches Casey and aggressively coerces her to sign off on fraudulent insurance claim forms.
Let's break down how this scam actually works for the listener, because it's not just, asking for a check.
No, it's elaborate.
He wants to generate heavily inflated repair estimates through his own construction company. The idea is that his company will do the absolute bare minimum shoddy repairs on the fire damage.
Right.
But they will officially bill the insurance company for exorbitant inflated rates. Then Larry, Thelma, and theoretically Casey would pocket the massive difference between the actual cost and the insurance payout as direct cash profit.
Exactly. It's a classic white-collar extraction scheme. But Casey Bruneau possesses extreme moral clarity.
She does.
She flat out refuses to participate in this insurance fraud. She will not sign her name to those documents.
Wait, hold on. I'm stuck on this arson and fraud detail. Okay. If Larry is already drowning in massive mortgage debt from the job loss, why burn down his own asset? Like, how does destroying the house and then committing federal insurance fraud solve a cash flow problem? Why wouldn't he just cut his losses, sell whatever he could, and walk away?
Because you are analyzing the situation through the lens of a rational actor who isn't panicking.
Ah, okay.
What we are seeing here is the psychology of the sunk cost fallacy, which is incredibly prevalent in financial crimes. Larry feels he has already committed so much, including, theoretically, the arson itself, that backing down means admitting total catastrophic defeat.
I see.
For individuals whose entire identity and ego are tied up in their financial success and career status, admitting that level of ruin feels like a literal existential threat. They compound their risks.
Right.
They tell themselves that just one more scheme, just one more fraudulent signature will magically make them whole again.
Well, Casey is standing firmly in the way of him becoming whole, and the tension finally snaps.
Well.
It's February 10th, 1981. This is exactly 3 days before the murder. Larry Brown goes over to Casey Bruneau's apartment to confront her about the outstanding insurance paperwork.
And he is furious.
He is. The coercion turns into outright, terrifying hostility.
The confrontation is so intense, and Larry's behavior is so volatile that immediately after he leaves, Casey is shaken to her core.
Yeah.
She picks up the phone and calls her mother to express her severe, genuine fear of Larry. She recognizes that something fundamental in his psyche has broken.
And there is a deeply cynical footnote to this financial motive that we have to mention.
Yes.
According to the source files, after Casey is murdered, Thelma Brown allegedly goes ahead and actually forges Casey's signature on those exact fraudulent insurance documents to advance the claim anyway.
It really demonstrates that the financial objective never wavered for a second. The violent removal of Casey was treated almost as an administrative hurdle to unlocking the capital they desperately felt they were owed.
Which forces us to look at the horrific reality of how they removed her.
Yes.
The timeline moves forward 3 days. It is now February 13th, 1981. And this is where the deep dive shifts from financial analysis to an unflinching forensic reconstruction of the crime scene.
It's vital to approach this part of the analysis objectively. We have to recognize that the physical evidence left in that room is the only voice the victim has left to communicate what happened during her final moments.
So it's shortly after 3:00 p.m. Casey Bruneau's boyfriend, who also works for Braniff Airlines, arrives at her apartment in Grapevine. He's been trying to call her all day with no answer.
Right.
He walks in and he discovers her body on the living room floor. He immediately calls 911.
Which is just awful.
Yeah. Now, he is initially a suspect, as the partner always is in these situations, but investigators quickly and definitively exclude him.
He had a solid alibi.
An airtight, heavily corroborated alibi, proving he was working his shift at the airline during the medical examiner's estimated time of death.
And when investigators begin processing the scene, the spatial layout of the apartment immediately indicates that this was not a quick, sudden, or subdued attack.
Not at all.
The physical condition of the room points to an exceptionally violent, chaotic struggle.
The violence wasn't contained to one spot. A heavy music turntable has been completely knocked over, which, takes significant force.
Yeah, that's heavy machinery for the time.
Exactly. There is substantial blood spatter distributed across multiple surfaces of the apartment. Investigators also find bloody fingerprint smudges on the kitchen sink.
Right.
This tells them the killer was likely bleeding themselves and tried to wash up, or at least brace themselves against the counter during the physical altercation.
The autopsy conducted by the Tarrant County Medical Examiner confirms the sheer brutality of the event. The official cause of death is ruled a homicide by strangulation. The killer had taken a brown electrical cord and wrapped it tightly around Casey's neck. But the strangulation was just the culmination of massive preceding physical trauma.
Yeah, she had severe bruising all over her face and neck. There were deep lacerations across her legs, and her nightgown had been pulled up above her waist. Because of the state of her clothing, investigators immediately ordered a sexual assault kit during the autopsy. But the clinical test returned completely negative. This wasn't a sexually motivated crime.
It was a crime of rage and total elimination. And the pathology report details a crucial finding: several broken fingernails on the victim.
That's so important.
In forensic science, broken fingernails are treated as a biological goldmine. They are highly indicative of what we call active defensive maneuvers.
Okay.
It guarantees the victim fought back against her attacker with immense physical effort, clawing, scratching, and trying desperately to remove the ligature.
Let's explain why that matters so much biologically. When you are fighting for your life and scratching an attacker, your fingernails essentially act like tiny little shovels.
That's a great way to put it.
They scoop up the attacker's skin cells, sweat, or in this case, blood. When fingernails break during a struggle of this magnitude, the probability of biological transfer trapping the attacker's DNA under the nails or tearing their skin is astronomically high.
She fought for her life with everything she had. And this struggle was so intense that it actually spilled over audibly.
Yeah.
An adjacent neighbor, living directly across from Casey's apartment, reported hearing something chilling during the mid-morning hours, perfectly aligning with the estimated time of death. The neighbor heard a male voice scream, "Oh God," and loudly request the police.
That auditory detail is just surreal to me.
It is.
Hearing the killer scream, "Oh God," and actually say something about the police. What does that psychological break reveal to you about the chaotic, unplanned reality of a violent crime, as opposed to, the clean assassinations we see in movies?
It completely shatters the myth of the cold, calculated mastermind.
Yeah.
In cinema, these acts are silent and efficient. In reality, attempting to strangle a healthy 35-year-old woman who is actively fighting back is physically exhausting and profoundly chaotic.
I can't even imagine.
The killer's scream of, "Oh God," suggests a moment of sudden, overwhelming panic. The situation had spiraled entirely out of their control. The blood, the physical exhaustion, the noise of the breaking turntable. It was a messy reality that violently clashed with whatever plan they had engineered in their head.
Right.
The mention of the police might have been an instinctive, almost delusional reaction to the chaos they were creating, or maybe a desperate, split-second attempt to feign innocence if they realized someone in the building was listening. It is the absolute sound of a perpetrator realizing they have crossed a point of no return.
Wow. And because of that brutal, active defensive struggle, the killer did not walk away unscathed. They left with physical injuries, and crucially, they left something of themselves behind.
Yes, as they did.
So, on the very day of the murder, February 13, Grapevine detectives are already connecting the dots regarding the financial disputes. They head straight to the residence of Thelma Brown to conduct interviews.
Because that's the obvious link.
Exactly. Thelma is working an international flight, so they end up interrogating her husband, Larry Dean Brown.
And almost immediately, the detectives spot something glaring.
Yeah.
Right there on Larry's right hand, just below his thumbnail, is a fresh, raw, physical wound. The top layer of skin has been completely torn away.
Oh, wow.
The detectives ask him about it, and Larry claims it's just a construction injury from his side business. But the detectives note in the file that his answers are highly evasive. They press him on it. They point out that a torn-away layer of skin doesn't really look like a typical hammer strike or a scrape from a 2x4. It looks like it was ripped.
And given the broken fingernails and active defensive wounds found on the victim's body just hours prior, a fresh tearing injury on the suspect's hand is a massive, glowing red flag.
Absolutely massive.
And the moment they start focusing on his physical injuries, Larry's demeanor changes entirely. His willingness to assist law enforcement evaporates instantly.
He knows he's caught in the lie.
He abruptly terminates the interview. He outright refuses to undergo any further questioning. He refuses to submit to fingerprinting. He refuses to take a polygraph examination. And most tellingly, he vehemently refuses to allow the investigators to take any photographs of his injured hand. He just shuts it all down.
And this highlights the immense frustration of 1981 technology. They didn't have DNA profiling. They couldn't force a cheek swab.
Right.
Without a confession, without an eyewitness to the actual murder, and without the scientific ability to physically match that hand wound to the scene through genetics, the investigation legally hits a brick wall. The technology of the era simply could not overcome his constitutional refusal to cooperate. So the case stalls.
It just stops.
It goes completely cold for nearly 3 decades.
Which is agonizing for the family, but behind the scenes, something incredibly important is happening, or rather, not happening.
Right.
The evidence is simply resting. Fast forward to 2010, the Grapevine Police Department decides to dust off the files. They take Casey's clothing, specifically the nightgown she was wearing when she was murdered, which had been preserved in the evidence file since the autopsy, and they send it to a specialized forensic laboratory.
This is where we need to explain the leap from early 80s serology to 2010's molecular biology.
Yes, please.
In 1981, serology could really only tell you the basic blood type of a stain-like, whether it was type A, B, or O. That might help you exclude a large portion of the population, but it still leaves millions of potential suspects. It cannot point to a specific individual.
Right, but by 2010, forensic molecular biology changes the game entirely. Scientists aren't just looking at blood types anymore. They are extracting short tandem repeats, or STRs, from the nucleus of the cellular material.
Exactly.
It allows them to create a unique genetic barcode for the individual who left the cells behind. So, the lab isolates an unknown male DNA profile from a minute, tiny bloodstain located right on the left sleeve of Casey's nightgown.
What's fascinating here is the absolute vital role of the evidence clerks.
Oh, totally.
They are truly the unsung heroes of the criminal justice system. We always praise the detectives and the forensic scientists, but none of these biological breakthroughs ever happen without meticulous evidence preservation.
Let's explain why that preservation is so biologically fragile. If that nightgown had been stored improperly, say, shoved into a plastic bag while still damp, or exposed to extreme moisture in a hot Texas storage unit, the DNA would have been destroyed, right?
Precisely. Moisture encourages common bacteria and mold to grow on biological evidence. Those microorganisms release enzymes called nucleases.
Okay.
Nucleases literally act like microscopic scissors that chew up and destroy the long strands of DNA.
Yikes.
If the clerks in the 1980s hadn't properly dried the nightgown and stored it in a breathable paper environment, those nucleases would have completely degraded the genetic barcode.
The leap to molecular biology is entirely reliant on the quiet discipline of clerks maintaining the physical integrity of the evidence.
So what does this all mean? I look at that microscopic blood stain on a 30-year-old nightgown as essentially a biological ticking time bomb. The killer left it there in 1981, totally ignorant of what DNA even was.
Right.
And it just patiently waited in a dark evidence locker for 30 years for science to catch up and detonate it. And they have this pristine male DNA profile extracted from the blood on the sleeve. They upload it to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the national database.
Let's we go.
They hit enter, waiting for the match, and nothing. 0 hits.
Oh, man. Larry Brown has apparently stayed out of the criminal justice system for decades, so his DNA isn't in the database. The time bomb is armed, but it still hasn't found its target.
Yeah.
The science did its part, but it still requires traditional shoe leather detective work to point the science in the right direction. So we jump forward another 15 years, from 2010 to 2025.
Right. A Grapevine detective officially reopens the cold case file. But instead of just staring blindly at the DNA report, they go back to the beginning.
Smart.
They reevaluate the historical financial documents, the strict liability mortgage arrangements, the history of pressure, and the arson files. They look at the motive, and that massive, glaring motive points right back to Larry Dean Brown.
They track him down. Larry is now living in a suburban neighborhood in Loveland, Colorado, up in Larimer County.
Nice area.
The Grapevine authorities coordinate with the Larimer County Sheriff's Office to execute a covert operation. Because he refused a cheek swab in 1981, and they don't have enough probable cause for a warrant to force one now, they have to acquire his abandoned DNA legally.
This brings us to February 2026. Sheriff's deputies set up physical surveillance on Larry Brown's house. They wait. Finally, Laurie rolls his household trash receptacles out to the curb for pickup.
Now, you listening right now might be wondering, wait, can the cops just dig through my trash without a warrant? Isn't that a violation of my privacy?
Good question.
The answer is yes, they absolutely can, and it all goes back to a specific legal precedent regarding the Fourth Amendment.
Right.
The Supreme Court ruled in California v. Greenwood that once you place your garbage on the public curb for collection, you have functionally abandoned your expectation of privacy. It is legally considered abandoned property.
And the investigators swoop in the moment it hits the public curb and execute a trash pull. They dig through his garbage and recover a few discarded cola bottles and, crucially, a discarded classic bottle of barbecue sauce.
There it is.
They swab the mouthpieces of those discarded items, harvesting the epithelial and salivary DNA that Larry left behind when he consumed them. Those swabs are immediately packaged and transmitted to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification for Comparative Processing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I just cannot get over the poetry of this moment.
It's cinematic.
A man who thought he committed the perfect crime, who outsmarted the police in 1981 by refusing to cooperate, who evaded justice for 45 years, raising a family and living a full life, is ultimately brought down because he wanted some barbecue sauce with his dinner and threw the empty bottle in the trash.
Yeah.
It is the most mundane household item imaginable, acting as the ultimate instrument of justice.
And on May 28, 2026, the laboratory at the University of North Texas returns the results. The genetic material recovered from the discarded barbecue sauce bottle and soda bottles is a direct, unequivocal match to the foreign blood found on the left sleeve of Casey Bruneau's nightgown.
And it isn't just a weak or partial match. The scientific strength is staggering. The statistical probability indicates that this genetic profile has an estimated frequency of occurrence of approximately 1 in 17 billion among Caucasian individuals.
Let's put that in perspective for a moment.
Yes, there are only about 8 billion people on Earth today. A 1 in 17 billion chance means you would need more than 2 entirely separate Earths populated by entirely different people to find even one coincidental genetic match. It functionally excludes every other human being on the planet.
The evidence is undeniable at this point. On June 8, 2026, Larimer County deputies move in and arrest Larry Dean Brown, who is now 79 years old, on a warrant for murder. He is extradited back to Texas, booked into the Tarrant County Jail, and on June 29, a Tarrant County grand jury formally indicts him for intentionally causing the death of Beverly Bruneau by strangulation.
But the timeline doesn't end with him just sitting quietly in the cell.
Yeah.
This brings us right up to today, July 20, 2026.
Right.
In a massive procedural shift, today happens to be Larry Brown's 80th birthday, and today he was officially released from the Tarrant County Jail after posting bond. He is back out awaiting trial.
This raises an important question about the upcoming legal battle. We are looking at a highly complex trial ahead. The defense attorney, Colin McLaughlin, has already signaled this strategy.
Yeah.
He's arguing that the evidence is primarily circumstantial and that the DNA match actually has an innocent explanation.
Right, because how do you explain away a 1 in 17 billion DNA match to a jury?
It's tough.
The defense asserts that because Larry, his wife, Thelma, and Casey were all close friends at one point, and former roommates and co-owners of the property, the presence of Larry's genetic material on Casey's clothing could have occurred through casual, nonviolent, everyday contact prior to the homicide.
Like maybe he bumped into her or did laundry at the house months prior.
Exactly.
And that is exactly why the prosecution's counter-argument is so devastatingly precise. The prosecution isn't just relying on touch DNA or stray skin cells, which can easily be transferred through casual contact or a hug.
Yeah.
They're relying on the biological nature of the stain itself. The DNA profile from 2010 wasn't extracted from a stray hair. It was extracted from blood deposited directly on the nightgown sleeve.
So it's not just about who left the DNA, it's about what the DNA is made of. It is extremely difficult to argue casual contact if it's your literal blood smeared onto the victim's sleeve.
Exactly. When you synthesize the evidence, it perfectly aligns with the historical record. The location of the foreign blood on the sleeve indicates a direct biological transfer from the assailant during a defensive struggle.
Right.
We know from the autopsy that the victim engaged in active defensive maneuvers, fighting hard enough to break her fingernails, scooping up biological material.
Yeah.
And we know from the 1981 interrogation file that Larry Brown presented to detectives on the exact day of the murder with a fresh, raw, torn wound on his right thumb. The prosecution will argue that she clawed his hand during the strangulation, tearing his skin and his bleeding thumb smeared onto her sleeve as she fought him off.
When you layer that irrefutable physical reality over the clear, escalating pattern of financial coercion, the suspected dual arson fires, and the documented threats that terrified Casey just 3 days before she was killed, the circumstantial defense of "we were just old friends" completely collapses under the weight of the evidence.
It really does.
It's an ironclad narrative built on decades of patience.
It is a phenomenal piece of prosecutorial construction. But as we analyze the brilliant science and the legal maneuvering, we have to recenter this narrative on the human toll. We have to remember the victim at the heart of all this paperwork and pathology.
Absolutely. Beverly Casey Bruneau was 35 years old. She was an independent professional who simply refused to be bullied into a fraudulent scheme.
Right.
Her surviving family waited over 45 years for this phone call. Her sister, Carol Bruneau Malson, gave a very poignant quote recently. She said that while the arrest was a joyous relief, it was deeply tempered by the tragedy of a life cut short. She noted this heartbreaking mathematical reality. Casey has now been deceased for a period longer than her entire living existence.
It's a stark reminder of the time stolen from her. But if there is a core synthesis to take away from this entire deep dive, it is this. The passage of decades cannot erase the truth when you combine meticulous physical evidence preservation with modern scientific advancement.
That's beautifully said.
The truth simply waits in the dark until the light of technology is bright enough to reveal it.
It's incredible to think about the dedication it takes to preserve that truth. But before you go, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over, something we didn't really touch on during the forensic breakdown.
Okay.
Consider the incredibly dark irony of that reciprocal life insurance policy attached to the mortgage.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was a financial instrument explicitly designed by a bank to provide security, to offer peace of mind, and to protect these women from unforeseen tragedy. Instead, because of a layoff and sheer human greed, it became the exact blueprint and the primary financial incentive for a brutal murder.
It's chilling.
It really forces you to wonder, how many of our modern, automated, everyday financial safeguards are inadvertently creating dangerous hidden incentives when the people tied to them are placed under extreme economic pressure?